hello everyone. This is Laura Flagg, Program Assistant at the Syracuse University Environmental Finance Center. On behalf of the Environmental Finance Center Network, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar entitled Navigating Funding Options for Water Infrastructure. I will be providing some technical support for today's session. Please take a moment to observe your GoToWebinar control panel. Most of the functions are self-explanatory, but I'd like to draw your attention to the questions section on your control panel. During today's session, you will all be kept on mute to ensure audio quality and to minimize background noise. Should you have a question, please type it into the GoToWebinar question dialog box at any time. We will be holding all questions until the end of today's presentation to ensure that we end on time. We have over 180 registrants for the webinar today, so we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. Today's presenters have consented to share the presentation slides with you, and we will make the slides available as well as a video recording following the webinar on the EFCN website. And you can access this website at efcnetwork.org. Please allow 1 week for the processing and posting of these materials. So quickly, to just give everyone an idea of where others on the webinar are tuning in from, we've prepared this map. You can see that we have attendees spread all throughout the country, so thank you all for joining us. This webinar is one of several webinars conducted by the Environmental Finance Center Network for the Smart Management for Small Water Systems project. We also have in-person workshops in all 50 states, and you can view all upcoming webinars and workshops also on our website again at efcnetwork.org. The EFCN provides training and technical assistance to small public water systems in all 50 states and 5 territories to help local water systems achieve and maintain compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act. Here on the slide, you can see the various centers that make up the EFCN, and you can see that we have centers that are spread all across the country from New York to Kansas to California. And as I said, I'm from the Syracuse University Environmental Finance Center, and I will have a colleague joining me from the EFC at the University of North Carolina today. Our project focuses on various areas of expertise. We have workshops, trainings, and direct assistance provided on the following areas of expertise, so asset management, energy management, meeting regulatory compliance, fiscal planning and rate setting, multi-funding coordination, communications and decision-making, water loss reduction, working with other water systems, financing, funding problems, and managing small utilities in drought. So at this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to our speakers for today. Here with me today, I have Stacy Isaac-Barazer, an Senior Project Director with the Environmental Finance Center at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. Her main areas of expertise are pricing and affordability of water and wastewater services and financing stormwater management. We also have joining the webinar today Benjamin Shuman, who serves as a Senior Engineer at the USDA headquarters in the Water and Environmental Programs of Rural Utilities Service. All right, Stacy, take it away.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for that introduction, Laura. And let's see, do a quick run through here. Hopefully my screen is coming through okay, Laura?
Yes, we're seeing all the slides.
Great. Okay, so as Laura mentioned, I am with the Environmental Finance Center that's based at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. I'm actually in a satellite office. I'm in the Atlanta metro area in Georgia. This picture that you see here is a nice, actually recent picture of our staff. Most of our students are in the picture as well, and we actually took this one last week. Sometimes we're showing pictures that are a couple years old, so it's nice to have a new one. What we do at the Environmental Finance Center is our goal is to enhance the ability of governments and other organizations to provide environmental programs and services in what we call fair, effective, and financially sustainable ways. And we do that through both research as well as teaching and outreach, and we also do program design and evaluation for these environmental programs and services. one of our taglines that we like to use is how you pay for it matters. So how you pay for an environmental project matters. It has public education ways that are affected. It also can affect policy for your local community or your group. So, we encourage and we try to support groups when they try to figure out how they're going to pay for an environmental project. So today's webinar, like Laura mentioned, we're going to focus on navigating different options for water infrastructure. So the objectives are to learn about the variety of financing options for water infrastructure needs and look at ways that you can access these different financing programs. We also want to compare a couple of popular ways of financing projects, infrastructure projects, namely grants, compare grants versus loans, and look at some perhaps more sustainable funding sources for your projects. We also want to learn about some recent efforts to streamline funding applications, specifically through the USDA. So we have Ben Shuman, who will speak in a few minutes about specifically the preliminary engineering report and the new RD Apply online application option that's available through the USDA. So you'll be hearing from Ben later in the webinar. Again, this is sort of the objectives, but in this case, we kind of show you who's going to cover the three main topics. So you've heard from Laura already in the introduction. I'll compare and contrast grants versus loans and look at sustainable funding sources, and then we'll have Ben, and then we hope to have some questions at the end before we wrap up. So feel free to let us know if you have questions as we go along here. All right, I'm going to hand back to Laura to run our first polling question.
All right, thank you, Stacey. So we have a couple polling questions to start off before we get into the presentation. The first one here is, what size drinking water system does your utility operate by number of people served? And we have very small, 500 or few people served, small, 500 to 3,300, medium, 3,300 to 10,000, large or very large, 10,000 or more, and also the option of not a drinking water utility. So I see people are sending their answers in now. I'll give a couple more seconds just so we can try to get everyone's response. All right. So it looks like most of the people on the webinar today are not a drinking water utility. We're pretty evenly split between small, which is 500 to 3,300 people served, and large or very large with 10,000 or more people served, and then also evenly split between very small, which is 500 or fewer people served, and medium, which is 3,300 to 10,000 people served. So thanks all for answering that first question. And the second polling question that we're going to ask is, does your water system currently have any debt? So the responses here are yes, no, or I don't know. We'll give people 10 to 20 seconds to answer this question as well. All right. So we have 43% of the attendees saying that yes, your water system currently does have debt. And then again, pretty even numbers in terms of no, there's no debt, or I don't know. All right. So Stacey, I will turn the presentation back to you now.
Great. Okay. So next we'll look at the variety of funding options for infrastructure needs. And I have a couple of screenshots in here to show you how to get to this yourself. But I will also try to navigate it on our website so that you can see if we have time at the end of the webinar today. So basically, this slide shows that you type in the EFC Network.org into, as a URL. And that website has a lot of information regarding this whole project of smart management for small water systems. So you can go and look here at workshops and webinars that we have that are coming or past ones. This is where you'll find, for instance, the recording of today's webinar after about a week or so. You can go here and select technical assistance, put in a little bit of information, and someone will contact you to provide direct technical assistance to your water utility. But I want to highlight here under resources, the third link down is funding sources by state. So the good news is that there are several funding sources that you can look at in terms of public financing sources for your drinking water infrastructure projects. So the first thing you do is go to that URL, click on funding sources by state, and what you would see come up on that page is a map like this one. And the map is interactive in that you select your state, you click on it, and a table, like you see the thumbnail on the left side of the screen, will come up. And so each row in that small image of the table, each row is a different financing program for drinking water projects. And I will mention, when I say public financing options, we do not include things like the local bank or credit union or private banks on here. So these are programs like Ben is going to talk about, USDA, rural development programs. The state revolving fund program is on there as well. So it doesn't include the private sources, but most of the public financing options should be there. And so you would get a bigger version of that table, of course. So here we have, for example, we clicked on Oregon, and the table that would show up. Again, if we have time at the end, we'll navigate live to the website so you can see exactly how this works. Hopefully these two slides should get you there. So you'll see that there are several potential funding sources. So that's the good news. However, it's challenging. It can be hard for small water systems especially to navigate these different funding programs. Small water systems obviously have smaller staffs, and it is difficult to find the time and the resources to kind of figure out not just one program, but all the different programs that you may want to be applying for funding from. Applying for funding from one project, for one project, I should say, from multiple programs can be complicated in terms of how these programs interact and the timing and sort of the order. So some other good news is that many states have developed some sort of a unified funding committee to help small water systems in navigating this process that can become kind of convoluted and complicated. So why have coordination at the state level? I think there are many benefits, but from the perspective of the funder, having different goals, each funding program would have a different goal, but this sort of coordination can help them support their specific program goals and efforts. From the applicant's perspective, there's improved customer service in that if you call one funder, you don't want them to say, well, I can't help you because you're rural versus urban, or whatever the case may be. I'm sorry, good luck. If the different funding programs are coordinating and basically communicating with each other, hopefully they know enough about each other's programs that maybe if they have to tell you as a water utility that they cannot fund your project, maybe they can make suggestions of programs that may be able to fund the specific project. So that's one of the benefits I see for the applicants. And then for citizens in general, having this sort of coordination stretches public funding dollars. These are all essentially tax dollars at the end of the day, and local governments spending time in a more focused way is helpful in terms of stretching those dollars. So this is not a new topic. It's not easy to always do this coordination, but there certainly have been national efforts at coordinating, and I wanted to show you guys a couple examples. So this was signed back in June 2011. It was a Memo of Agreement between the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and USDA. And there are certain things that have come out of this Memo of Agreement that we'll talk about, like the preliminary engineering report, sort of a standard way of doing that, an interagency way. So Ben will discuss that a little bit later. More recently, in 2013, there was another interagency memo, this time involving a couple more partners like HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing. So at the national level, there is this realization that there's a need or there are benefits to coordinating, and so there have been some efforts. There's been another organization that's been very active in this space of coordinating funding programs that benefit specifically small community water systems. And so the Small Community Water Infrastructure Exchange, or SHWI, as we call it for short, is a network of water funding officials. SHWI is, it came into being under the auspices of the Council of Infrastructure Financing Authorities, or CIFA. CIFA is sort of a member association for all the state revolving fund program managers across the country. So each state has a drinking water and a clean water state revolving fund, and the staff who manage those programs in each state kind of get together a couple times a year in this membership association that is CIFA. And one of the ongoing themes that CIFA has tried to discuss and provide resources for the states is on how to help the smaller community water systems. And so that's kind of where SHWI came from. So their website is listed there. What's interesting on their website too, SHWI has a list of contacts by state, and that has been, I think, helpful to a lot of different utilities. They recently upgraded their website. This is a screenshot here of the website. And one of the things that you'd find here and not find in too many other places on the web right now is that for each state, SHWI lists the existing coordination efforts. So if there's a body, there's a name of the group that's coordinating in that state, coordinating the different funders, they try to have a link. If that group has a website, they at least list the name. And it's hard to see on the screenshot, but you can definitely go to the website yourself. It lists a name and contact information for the coordinator or the main contact for that support group. So that's a really good resource if you are looking to fund a project from different funding sources. All right, next we're going to compare and contrast grants versus loans, where loans are kind of the more sustainable funding source. So I'll try to make that case. Basically, when we look at how payments are made for infrastructure projects, you have a few different options. You can save in advance at the utility and just save in advance and pay. You can pay as you go, so to handle receipts as they're current. You can pay afterwards, meaning that someone loans you the money and then you pay them over time, or grants where you don't really pay at all. So grants are usually pretty popular, so I wanted to just kind of talk about them first. Hopefully no one is checking their email while they're listening or participating in the webinar today, but in case you are, maybe you'll see an email like this. We don't recommend that you click on this particular link, especially if it's from Nigeria. These are, we all want free money, but sometimes grants are not exactly what they seem. So the next slide shows some of the drawbacks, as I would describe. Grants are not completely free money. The application for a grant can be expensive in terms of both staff time and actual money that you spend putting together the proposal. The applications can take months to process by the funding agency. Often there are lots of strings attached. We see more and more, reporting, for instance, reporting requirements, quarterly reporting, maybe even monthly reporting. And another common thing is grants often require a percentage match. So your community or your utility has to put some of the money into the project yourself. And this one about lots of competition really exacerbates all the other points, because as more and more entities apply for the grant funding, you have to spend more time on your application, and so it becomes more expensive for you essentially. Then if we look at the second bullet here, the funder has more applications to work through, so the process to even find out if you've won the grant usually takes longer. And one of the ways that funders try to manage the process is to attach more strings to the whole grant funding. So it just exacerbates the whole process or all the downsides of grants because of the competition. And in some cases we found that grants are a little bit difficult to sustain in that the programs or the projects that the grant funds originally sort of doesn't benefit from the right amount of funding ongoing in terms of upkeep, operation, management, replacement, and rehabilitation in a lot of cases. But I'll just leave it at that for now. In the old days, water systems, took advantage of quote-unquote free money. There was the construction grant program of the 70s and the 80s, and it seemed like free money, but it really wasn't ever free. It came from tax dollars. Today, that picture is very different. The financial burden has shifted from the federal government and also from even state funding to the local government and the local utility. So it's really, the funds are really being raised now by the water system itself from the sale of its service to the customers. All right, so this is an older chart that we've had at the EFC, and it's really telling. It shows EPA assistance dollars, and it shows the peak, and it shows what's going on, not today, but it ended in, this particular chart that we found only went up to the year 2000. The second bar here was adjusted for inflation. It's really not a complete picture because it ended in 2000, but I don't find many folks when I present this chart around the country that say that we expect that the bars, the lines, are going to go back up. Federal spending for, in this case, wastewater, has gone down, and we don't really see any signs that it's going to consistently go back up. So we've pulled this chart together. One of my colleagues, Shadi Escaf at the Environmental Finance Center at UNC, worked on trying to kind of project this out a little bit further. And so we pulled data up until 2014, and you'll see here that state and local government spending is continuing to grow, but federal spending has declined since the 1980s. So waiting around, I guess the point here, waiting around for a grant to cover your infrastructure needs at your utility is probably not your best bet. So we need to look at some more sustainable options. And loans typically present that option in that you borrow the money from an entity, typically from a bank, and it can be from a government-sponsored program such as the State Revolving Fund or the USDA Rural Development Programs. And then you have to repay the loan, of course. The debt market is another, we want to consider that because water infrastructure, unlike some other things that you can get a loan for, go to the debt market, water infrastructure has a long, useful life. So it makes sense to amortize the loan over the lifespan of the equipment so that the people who benefit from the system pay for it. Not just you today living in that, not a customer in your community right now, but the one who's going to be, using your water in 10 years or 15 years. So that's one way to look at it as to sort of justifying why borrow and why take on debt for water infrastructure projects. A bond is a written promise to repay money on a definite schedule at a fixed rate for the life of the bond. Some small systems do engage in bonds, but it's not the most common way to fund projects at really small systems, just because you need a lot of professionals involved. It's a pretty expensive way to get the capital you need, but certainly some do it. Just want to mention in terms of bonds too that there are different types. There are GO or general obligation bonds that are backed by the taxing power of the local government itself, and then there are revenue bonds that are really backed more by the water or wastewater utility rates. So lenders look for creditworthiness. They want to see that you can repay the debt that you've borrowed. And one of the things that we do through this project is we have certain tools or benchmarks that you can calculate for your utility. Benchmarks that the lender would also be looking at, or at least looking at similar ones, to see where you stand today, and over time hopefully run those benchmarks again or those analyses and see if you're improving sort of your score on some of those benchmarks. And that's something that we can help you use those tools that help you calculate the benchmarks. Like Laura mentioned, we have technical assistance that we can provide through the project. And there are certain practices that can basically increase your chances for funding. We're talking here about having a capital improvement program or plan. Practicing asset management is another thing that funding agencies or lenders look at. So that's something that this project can help you with a little bit. But I think now we're gonna look at another polling question that Laura's gonna bring up, and it's looking at different types of public financing options and who you guys might be engaging with right now in terms of these programs. Laura?
Yes, so I just launched the poll. We are asking, from which of the following does your water system currently have the most financing? And we have the options of state revolving fund loan, USDA loan grant, community development block grant, bank or bonds. Some of these might not apply to all of you, so if that's the case, no need to answer. And I'll give everyone a couple seconds to send in their responses.
And I'll say it's fine to guess which one you have most financing from. I suspect several of you probably have financing from a couple of these, but try to think of the one that you have the most financing from. And if you are, I'll say just to kind of widen the pool here, if you are a technical assistance provider or a consultant who is working with a particular utility right now, you can answer on their behalf, or the utilities that you work with. Which one of these sources have you seen most of the financing come from?
All right. So I'll give just a couple more seconds with that clarification. Okay. So it looks like most of you have, or most of your funding comes from the USDA loan or grant. That's 33% of those that responded. Very close behind is 28% are the state revolving fund loan. And then pretty evenly dispersed between the last three, 16% through bonds, and then tied with at 12% are community development block grants and from the bank. All right, I'll turn it right back to you, Stacy.
Good, thanks, Laura. And actually, now I think that we are going to hear from Ben Shuman with the USDA. He's going to talk about a couple of specific efforts that the USDA has used to streamline the process for applying for their funding programs, especially for small systems. So Ben?
Thank you, Laura. Today I'm going to talk about recent USDA efforts to streamline funding applications. But first I want to cover some of the basics on eligibilities and what our program can pay for. So it's important to note that rural areas rely heavily on USDA rural development, rural utility service to pay for water and waste infrastructure improvements. And there are a number of different programs that fall under those programs. That includes our largest program, the one that's most well-known, which is the Water and Waste Disposal Loan and Grant Program. But we also have other programs. Another is called the Emergency Community Water Assistance Grant Program. That program was important in helping many drought-affected regions last year. I expect it will be again this year. It provides limited grant funds to water utilities that have drinking water concerns. We also provide technical assistance and training grants. Those often go to organizations that work hand in hand with rural communities. Examples of organizations that may receive those grants are the Rural Community Assistance Partnership and the National Rural Water Association. We have other programs as well. Some of them are targeted to particular types of recipients. An example is funds that are targeted to rural Alaska Native villages or to colonists along the U.S.-Mexican border. Let's talk a little bit about our primary program, the Water and Waste Disposal Loan and Grant Program. In that program, the main types of applicants that are eligible for funds are not-for-profit entities. When I say that, I'm referring to a not-for-profit water or wastewater utility. It's talking about a not-for-profit utility. Secondly, Native American tribes. And third, municipalities, towns, public bodies in general, as well as rural areas that may be under a county or other government. They all have to be under 10,000 population to be eligible in the service area. It's also important that an applicant is unable to obtain commercial credit at reasonable rates and terms. So our programs have an exclusively rural focus, and it's important to note that the part of the United States, the part of the water utilities that we work with is systems that serve below 10,000 population. In fact, since 2009, 85% of the systems that we have served have been 5,000 or less, and during that same time period, 52% were serving 1,500 population or less. So a large majority of our systems are small or very small. Our interest rates change quarterly, but I wanted to make sure that everyone is aware of how low they are at this time. We have a 3-tier structure for our interest rates, and they're based mostly on the median household income of the community that is going to be served, but there are some other factors that come into play for the poverty rate that also requires that a health and or sanitary condition be involved in the need for the loan. So the poverty rate is now at 1.75%. Market rate is up at 2.875%, and intermediate is at 2.25%. So you see those rates are at historic lows at this time. Also, our terms are generally for 40 years, but they might be limited in some cases by state laws or the useful life of the system in some cases. So what do you have to do to obtain a loan from or grant from USDA Rural Development Water and Waste Disposal Program? There's basically 3 pieces to an application. The first, in my mind, is the preliminary engineering report. The second, which I'll come back to, the second is an environmental report, and some of you may be familiar with the requirements of the National Environmental Policy Act, and there are a number of other federal and state environmental laws that have to be considered as the project moves forward. The environmental report would be an application document that addresses those concerns. Thirdly, there are a number of financial, organizational, and other documents that are required in support of an application. I'm going to focus on preliminary engineering reports. They represent an analysis of what the scope of the project is, why a project is needed, different ways that the problem that a community faces could be resolved, and a detailed description of the specific proposal, cost estimates to demonstrate how much the project is anticipated to cost, and all of those are wrapped up into an engineering analysis document. There are, in some cases, limited grant funds that are available to pay for the cost of the technical services, professional services, usually from an engineering firm that goes into a preliminary engineering report. There are 2 grant sources in particular that I want to mention. One is known as the PPG, or Preliminary Planning Grants. Those grants are up to both of these. The second is called Search Grants. These grants are both available on a limited basis. There's a lot more need than there is availability. They have a maximum amount of $30,000, and the search grants are targeted at the smallest and lowest income communities. Preliminary planning grants can be available to some communities that are a little bit larger, up to the 10,000. Search grants are limited to 2,500 population. So those may be available to help the communities pay for their engineering services in support of an application for funds. Now I'm going to switch focus a little bit, and I want to talk about the recent streamlining efforts that we have engaged in. Some of them involve our partners. We take our partnerships with other federal agencies involved in funding water infrastructure very seriously. We work hand in hand with the EPA State Revolving Fund programs, CDBG HUD programs. The Indian Health Service is another one of our important partners. And we all work together at a federal level and also reach out to state funders through our state offices across the country. And we mentioned earlier in the presentation a Memorandum of Agreement. That represents part of the high-level coordination that takes place. But we also have some independent efforts. RD Apply has been an independent effort of rural development across rural utility service to do some streamlining. So what is RD Apply? It's actually an online application intake system. It accepts applications, makes sure that they have all the different pieces that are needed so that they don't have to be sent back to an applicant to request more material. And the program can be used for applications for all three of the rural utility service primary programs. I haven't mentioned the electric and telecommunications programs because they're not much really related to the content of this web service. Also includes those in addition to our water and waste disposal program through RD Apply. So why use RD Apply? First of all, it's convenient. It provides access to an application system that is available all the time online. You can pick up your application at any time and continue it, providing information on your own schedule. It's very important to note that it provides security for the application process. So each user has a unique identification and password, and only people who are supposed to be using the application system for a given application can access it. It also provides for faster processing, and part of that is related to the fact that the system will ensure that the application is complete. Part of it is also that it helps the applicant to understand what's next and move them to and through the process. So who should use RD Apply? First of all, the applicant's official, whoever is there, such as a mayor, for example, would potentially apply through the RD Apply system, but then they would delegate. The applicant's official would delegate authorities to others, such as perhaps the board chair, a system manager, an accountant, an engineer, owner's attorney. There may be different roles that may become important in the system as we move through. And all users have to obtain what we call an EAuthentication, which verifies their identity in the system. And that's part of what provides the security to make sure that your information about your utilities for your community is protected and secure. And when is it available? It's available now. In fact, it's been live and online since last September. So we're happy to say that we have processed a number of applications already through RD Apply. This is a screenshot of RD Apply. This happens to be the help page, and you can see that there are a number of guides that are built into the system, and the red text indicates the location of the help button, which would show up on the RD Apply homepage. Also, on YouTube, there's there are a number of, actually there are 4 at this time, videos that you can watch about RD Apply. And I provided a link to the first one. It's actually quite well done. This is the Welcome to RD Apply video that tells you some of the basics about how it's set up. So when you get the chance to take a look at this webinar, please do follow this link and take a look at the video. The next initiative I wanted to talk about was mentioned earlier, and that was the Preliminary Engineering Report Interagency Template. So back in 2012, a number of the partner agencies that I listed earlier at the federal level also reached out to state agencies, and a group of federal and state partners developed an interagency document that represented a common core of what should be in a preliminary engineering report, using input from all of the different partners. A lot of state input was included in that, and there was formal agreement between the federal partners. The document was signed by all of the federal partners in January of 2013. Each agency then issued that document in different ways, but for Rural Utility Service, we issue that document as RUS Bulletin 1780-2, which is available on our website, which is shown here. That includes some summary information as well as the interagency template itself, which is essentially an outline of a preliminary engineering report with explanatory information. The next part of this process I want to mention is our upcoming initiative. We are underway right now in development of an electronic preliminary engineering report. So this is a system similar to RD Apply that will query a consulting engineer to develop a preliminary engineering report online. So it's an interactive tool. It asks for the information from the interagency template, and it ensures that the information that is required for a preliminary engineering report is uploaded by making sure, similar to the way that RD Apply makes sure, that the document is complete before it's submitted. In the end, the electronic PR creates an Adobe PDF file of a preliminary engineering report, which is the property of the consulting engineer at that time. And then they can provide that to the community, and the community and the engineer can work together to decide which agencies to submit that report to. So note that the electronic PER is separate but integrated into RD Apply. So it is a separate module. It allows for the creation of the Adobe file of a PER, which could be printed out or it could be emailed. Doesn't have to be printed out. Could be sent to a different agency. It doesn't have to be sent to USDA. We hope that they will, though. And those files can, of course, be uploaded into RD Apply because the systems are integrated. As I said, the electronic PR or EPR is under development, but here's a screenshot that shows the base homepage, give you a general idea of what an engineer would see when they are ready to create a preliminary engineering report. It would have a list of PERs that they're developing. Again, this is the tool for the engineers, which makes it slightly different than the RD Apply system. Advantages of the EPR is that it utilizes the same framework as RD Apply. It utilizes the same security features that RD Apply does. It retains the engineer's responsibility to make professional recommendations. So the USDA is not stepping into the engineer's role. We're not writing the preliminary engineering report for the engineer. We respect that that's an important function that the engineer plays. And it ensures that the reports are complete. And we believe it will reduce agency review times, in part by ensuring that the reports are complete when they're submitted through the system. So I appreciate your time today, and I will stick around to answer some questions, but here is my contact information if you have any at a future time. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. So we have a couple questions here that I'll go through, and Stacy and Ben, you can decide who answers them. You can both answer them whatever works for you. So the first question that we have are any grant programs covering privately owned systems such as mobile home communities? Stacy or Ben, are you there?
This is Ben Shuman. I can start on that. In some cases...
Okay, I'll just add to that a little bit. So it partly depends on the state. For example, Ben represents, the USDA programs, and as we saw from the poll that Laura did, next to USDA, or probably in some states more than USDA, the state revolving fund programs do a lot of the financing for these types of projects. And depending on the state, these would be eligible. And in other states, the SRF program has decided that it will restrict its loan and grant funds to locally owned, I should say local government. So only city and county owned utilities would be eligible. So it really depends on the state. And so what we've tried to do there is in some of the funding tables that we have that are state specific, we try to identify that if we found it on the website. Sometimes the state program will identify if they fund mobile home parks, for instance, or if they limit their funding to the local government, city and county utilities.
Great, thank you. So the next question we have is, has USDA RD adapted their policies and requirements to accommodate regional water or wastewater systems?
Yes, USDA works with many regional water systems across the country, and we have throughout the history of our program been working side by side with them as applicants. So I know of a number across the country that have received loans and grants from us over a period of decades. So I don't believe that there are obstructions in our program that would prevent any regional systems from working with us. The 10,000 population cutoff would be applied in general as a matter of the individual communities that a regional system served, if that's the nature of the question. So a regional system might serve 3 or 5 smaller systems, each of which might have a population below 10,000. Thanks.
Thanks, Ben. This question is also for you, I'm guessing. Has USDA RD given any consideration to making water or waste disposal funds available during the design phase of a project?
That is something that we have talked about, but it is complex given the regulations and processes that we face. So it is a matter of ongoing discussion. But at this time, the sources of funding that are available through our program are available only for the preliminary engineer report, the application phase, which I know is earlier than the question was asking. And then, of course, once interim financing is available or a loan is closed, essentially once there is a bid opening, then other sources of funding become available that can be used to pay for professional services. I understand that there are ongoing concerns about that issue, and we are talking about them in-house to see what we can do. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. And this is also for you. When is the EPR expected to be completed?
We are hoping for an October 1st, what we call a soft launch. So that's partly dependent on contractual timetables. And so we'll see if we're able to reach that. But at this point, we're hoping for an October 1st. Soft launch means that the system will not be mandatory, but it will be allowed for use, which, by the way, is the same approach that we have currently for RD Apply. So people are welcome to use RD Apply. I think that they'll find that it meets their needs, but it is not a mandatory system at this time for nationally for our program. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next question we have here is, can you tell a little bit about the USDA criteria to select competing projects?
Well, I confess I'm an engineer in the program, so I'm not the best expert about the criteria for award of loans and grants, but I can tell you that two factors are important. One is the readiness of an applicant to proceed. Obviously, sometimes we have applicants who have a desire to proceed, but they may not have a complete application. That's part of the reason that we're moving towards RD Apply and other systems to help communities move through the steps in the process so that they will be ready. Another factor is that we have a scoring system which helps to evaluate between competing applications. Thank you.
Thanks. And we have a question about smaller projects. Are there any funding options that are targeted to smaller projects from $10,000 to $100,000? Ben, do you have any insight on that?
Okay. We do not have a separate fund for such projects. We would use the same programs that we use for our regular projects, and that's the Water and Waste Disposal Loan and Grant Program, unless, of course, the projects fell into one of our targeted programs. An example I mentioned earlier was the Emergency Community Water Assistance Grant Program. So as an example of the use of that would be that wells in the desert Southwest and in California may have dried up, and maybe some towns might be in a very bad situation where there really isn't any remaining sources of water that's currently constructed. There could be a town in the Midwest where a water tower could be destroyed by a tornado. A number of things like that that might make a project that's smaller eligible for grants that range in the hundreds of thousands of dollars depending on the project eligibility. I should mention that some of our technical assistance providers also that we work with have some funds of their own, like the National Rural Water Association and some of the regional Rural Community Assistance Partnerships. Some of them have some loan programs as well, which we work with them to help them for small projects. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. We have some time for a couple more questions. Stacy, this next one's for you. What are the types of practices that can make a utility more competitive for these funding programs?
That's a good question. So I kind of alluded to a couple of them during the slides earlier, but we've seen some programs at the state level ask to see an asset management plan, for instance. So they want to see that once they provide the financing for this particular infrastructure project, that the utility, the water utility, has a plan for taking care of these assets, repairing them, refurbishing them at different points in time, etc. Probably paying more attention to the sort of more critical parts of the system or the more critical infrastructure. So we've seen that sort of give some applicants for projects more points than others and sort of, raise them a little bit higher on the scoring process that Ben mentioned. We've also seen in some cases that some states have asked the utility to provide a sort of a long-term capital improvement program or plan. So sometimes looking out 20 years into the future. And so the funder is looking to see how this particular infrastructure project that they're considering funding fits into the overall sort of long-term capital plans of the utility. We've also seen, funders are sometimes interested in the rates of the community. So in some cases, a utility doesn't actually need a loan if they raise their water or sewer rates to an optimum level or just increase them to a reasonable level, then the utility itself can generate the funds to do the project, and there is no need to go to an external funder. So definitely how you design your rates, how often you analyze your rates and most likely increase them is something that the funders are looking at. And there have been examples, sort of anecdotal examples that I know of where a potential funder, let's say the State Revolving Fund Program, has gone in and done sort of a rate analysis of your rates are really relatively low and you probably should look at a rate increase. For example, to repay the loan from us, you need to be generating more revenue from your rates. And so you need a rate increase. And by the way, in some cases, when you do this rate increase, maybe you don't need to come to us. So those are some of the practices that we've seen, especially with smaller systems, that would sort of give them the competitive edge, if you will, because these funding sources, especially the grant components, are pretty limited and there's a lot of competition, like I mentioned before.
Thanks, Stacy. So we have time for one more question. This last question is for Ben. Can a project get both the PPG and the search funds?
I don't believe so because of the limited nature of those funds. That's something that they want to spread out to as many communities as possible.
All right, thank you so much. We have a couple questions just to finish up the webinar. I know that there are a few of you that answer or ask questions that weren't answered. We will follow up with you following the webinar to make sure that you get all of your questions addressed. So before we leave, we have two more poll questions for you. The first is, would you like to subscribe to the Environmental Finance Center blog? If you do want to subscribe, we would only be using your email for this. We don't put them on any lists or anything like that where you'd be getting more emails than just the blog posts that are posted. And I also believe that if you don't get your answer in right now, you can go to our website. Again, that's efcnetwork.org and sign up for the blog online there. All right. And then the last question we just wanted to ask you guys are, if you're a small water system that has 10,000 or fewer people served, are you interested in receiving in-depth technical assistance? If you are, just hit yes here, or if you're not sure but you're interested in it, you can definitely hit the last option here, not sure, I'd like more details. And then again, if you don't get your answer submitted right now, you can go online and fill out our technical assistance form on the website. All right. And the last thing, through the chat box, I will be sending out a survey just about how we did for the webinar today. If you would be able to take the time to complete the survey, we greatly appreciate it. And it will also be sent out in our follow-up email that you'll receive in the next day or so. In this email, you'll also receive information on how to access the recording and a copy of the slides. So if that's everything I have, Stacy and Ben, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I'd just like to say thanks to the folks for joining us today. We see some familiar names that have participated in our webinars before or have partnered with us on different projects. And thanks for your participation and your really good questions today.
I want to say thank you for welcoming me to this presentation, and I look forward to working with anyone who has any further questions.
Great. Thank you, everyone.